the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home, coming home. We're coming home, coming home. Even the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. The table is set. I will sit down, surrounded by friends, and feast. The table is set. We will sit down, surrounded by friends, and feast. Even the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. The table is set. We will sit down, surrounded by friends.
Your mom and Reggie, they're on the top of the world.
I had an idea.
What?
Why don't you tell the fans out there that are watching in Michigan, watching in Sacramento, all over the colony?
Don't forget the ones in Ontario, Canada.
Ontario,
Some
Canada.
of our favorite fans are out there.
We love Canada. Canada. Oh, Canada, the stars are greatly smiling. Jesus loves you, Canada. All right. Now I'm going to do a little dance.
This is a first. We've never had a dance. So here it is.
I think you got to lift it up.
You think so? I think we see it pretty well.
We don't have no music though.
We don't have any music.
Okay.
I don't know what you're going to do now, Fred.
I'm just going to bust one.
Okay.
Did that, huh?
You're sure you want me to put this up on YouTube?
Yep. Ain't nothing but a G thing, baby. 916, Jesus Christ is lady. He's the man in command, don't you see me? Because Jesus Christ took me away from sin and mercy. Rock the mercy. I love you, Jesus Christ, in every way you come. We three kings of Orient are. Travel gifts, we travel afar. Fields and fountains, lords and mountains, following yonder star. Peace out. We got to do it together.
All right, here we go.
Thank you. Peace.
Peace
out. Hi, CJ.
What is this? Long before San Antonio Sartori was formed within his mother's womb, his destruction was predestined. A vessel of wrath created for destruction shall meet its fate. in a collision with the vessel of God's holy vengeance. By sovereign decree, the Calvinist will meet your fate.
All right. What a way to. Well, we should have one commercial.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
All right. My summer began with Synod and it will end with Midwestuary. But in the middle, we have a special live stream today. Not everyone here was a delegate to Synod. Some of them were, Ben was at least a observer, but he had to be at Synod because he was the chairman of the task force for the virtual church. So I thought he might be a good person to have on today. A couple of people are late. Andy said he had limited time, and Nate just messaged me and said he was late. But we'll start with the newbies. Ben, you are a newbie.
Hello.
I never met you until Synod. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And I do want to have you and your sister on for sort of a family randos conversation at some point. Why don't you give us a little bit of background? You weren't born and raised CRC. Gressick, what nationality is that?
Yeah, this is a question I have to answer a lot. So my background on my dad's side is Polish. So our last name was originally Jezik, but you can't really say that in Canada. In English, and so when he emigrated to the border, they just hacked off the Z and it became Gressick. So that's where my last name comes from. I did not originally grow up CRC. When I was very, very young, my parents became part of the charismatic movement, and so they joined a church plant that my dad was the worship leader for, and so that's where we were going when I was a kid. So it was like 2-hour-long worship services. Lots of people falling over and speaking in tongues and things that I did not understand, but my parents very patiently explained. And then when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my parents, through a sort of complicated series of things, tried to move churches and go to church with my sister Melody, who was at a CRC at the time, thinking that would be a great thing to do. And then a few months later, Melody and her husband Ben moved away from that church, but my parents and I stuck around. And so that's where I ended up for most of elementary school and my high school years. So, yeah.
Okay. And you are a CRC minister now.
And I am a CRC minister, yeah. So I'm calling you from my office. I serve a church called Bethel CRC, one of many Bethel CRCs in Brockville, Ontario, which is just across the St. Lawrence River from upstate New York.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
I went to college. I went to college at Queen's University, which is about an hour west of here in Kingston, Ontario. I did a 3-year bachelor's of science in biology, and then I went to Tyndale Seminary in Toronto. And so I'm one of those EPMC students who did not go to Calvin.
Okay. And you were the chair of the virtual church task force. You want to give us a little summary of that whole business? Yeah, so I'll give the whole story very briefly. In 2023, I believe it was, there's a church plant There's a digital ministry in the CRC, Redeemer Online, and it's associated with a church in the Chatham area. And they had started a ministry during COVID, ministering to people exclusively online. And so there was an overture from another church in their classes asking that Synod declare that digital church that meets only online is not a church. And Synod, in response to that, said, we're not quite ready to declare this yet. We'd like to have a task force, which is supposed to be a 1-year commitment to study something and then come up with some recommendations. And so that task force started that fall, but it took them a little while to get going because
the office of the general secretary had a lot of stuff to deal with that year. And so because it was slower getting going, they got partway into it and realized that they were not going to make it back around to Synod in a year. So they added another year onto the mandate, and they also added a few more people into the mix of that task force. And so I joined about 6 months into the time that they had started meeting. How I got involved is, and this is going to sound like nepotism, which I guess it kind of is, but my sister works in the
Christian
office
Reformed
of the general.
Church is very familiar with nepotism. Trust me.
Okay, that's good. So my sister works in the office of the general secretary, and one of the jobs that she does is contacting people for task forces and things. And so we were talking one day just personally, and she said, I'm working on this virtual church task force and we need more people. Do you know anyone who would be interested? And I mentioned you, Paul, and she said, yes, we've already tried to contact him. And then I said, and I also would potentially be interested in that. And so my name got submitted along with a few others. There was kind of a vetting process. So I had to talk to Zach Kane, the general secretary. And then they decided they wanted me to be on the task force. And then I foolishly, in the interview process, said that I'd be willing to be chair if no one else would. And then when I got on the task force, no one else wanted to be chair. So I ended up as chair. Which was actually, in hindsight, a really great experience. I learned a lot and really enjoyed the process, but it was quite the, yeah.
And how do you feel about what Synod did with your task force?
I feel pretty good. One of the things that was really hard about this task force was we had a bunch of different sort of opinions in the group, and coming up with a report was kind of trying to put all those together into something that we got some consensus on. And so there were things that were written in the report that might not necessarily reflect like one person's opinion. It's kind of a blending. But I did feel like we gave a good grounding and some good ideas of what's kind of possible in the space. And so then in terms of like how Synod responded, I was kind of happy to see that they have sort of left it open to keep talking about it for a little while longer. I don't think that conversation will stay as open as it was at the Synod. Like, I'm pretty sure within the next year or two, something like the minority report will probably pass, or some other version of that. But I am happy. Yeah, sorry?
Synod?
Yeah, I think a subsequent Synod will probably take up the question again and kind of be a bit more restrictive.
1 year is way too short.
Yeah, maybe. But I'm happy there was space for experimentation. So yeah.
All right. Just so that we can get clear on what is probably the most important issue that has sort of come up in the is that just the original Dune, or are some of the sequels integrated into that volume?
No, that's just Dune 1. That is, I confess, the only one that I read. So.
Oh my word! I'm worried. All right. All right. I'm going to bring the next least familiar face into here, which is Mr. Casey Vandestreek, who did you drop the R because it didn't fit?
My ancestors were really poor coming in. They had to pay by the letter, so they let the R roll off.
Well, Casey, you are also new, although you did appear as the key grip in some of the videos. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I grew up in the CRC, but I grew up moving around a lot in the CRC. A lot of different pockets in the Midwest. And the question that people always ask then is, "Oh, is your dad a pastor?" And I said, "No, better. He was a basketball coach." My dad took the position as the Calvin's men's basketball coach when I was going into my sophomore year of high school. So
wow.
We were the family that then began to live in Michigan. None of my extended family, most people that I knew when I lived in South Dakota or Iowa or Illinois or Wisconsin, had relatives back in Michigan. We didn't. We became those relatives. And so I went through Calvin College while I was here, and already had an inkling that maybe God was calling me to ministry. So it would have been way more fun to just be a PE major, or they give it a big fancy name, kinesiology now. But really, like, bowling classes with my dad would have been more fun, but probably wouldn't have prepared me well for seminary. So I took courses with Kelly Clark and Rebecca DeYoung and Jamie Smith. Really wrecked me, but Nate Van Dennen was a classmate of mine, which was great. My wife and I, after we got married, we met at Calvin. We lived overseas in Beijing for 2 years to teach English. Had a chance to meet Kurt Sellis out there, which was really cool. It's weird how all these streams and the nepotism thing, Ben, is a real thing. All the interconnectedness is a real thing.
He says Kurt Sellis as if anybody outside the CRC would recognize that name and connect. So Casey, yeah, keep going.
Sorry, he's the head of the CRC's Reframe Ministries right now, which is an international missions kind of ministry that we have. Came back, went to seminary, spent 3 years at Ridgewood CRC in Jenison, Michigan, kind of as an associate pastor, along with, at the time, Joel Boot was there. Joel Boot became the executive director of our denomination, and had been a mentor of mine. I was really looking forward to working with him. And then I think your friend Jerry Dykstra, I think, stepped aside and Joel was brought on. I was in New Jersey, your old stomping grounds, Paul, for 10 years. The church is in Wyckoff, and Faith Community Church, loved it out there. And about 2 years ago, took a call to the Grand Rapids area. So I'm at Providence Christian Reformed Church in Grand Rapids, south side of Grand Rapids, if you're familiar with GR at all. So, yeah, been a long-time listener, first-time caller type of thing here, Paul. So I really appreciate being able to be on the show. It's a huge privilege and a blessing for me. So thank you.
All right. Well, there's Casey. Well, let's see who will be the next least known person here. I'll have to go with Andy Littleton, although Andy has done a randos. Andy has been on the channel for a book review. Andy says he has limited time here today. I don't know if I've ever seen Andy without a baseball cap. So Andy, little brief introduction into who you are.
Okay, a little brief introduction into who I am. Let's see. You did see me without a baseball cap at Synod.
I guess
Paul.
I did. I guess you didn't wear a baseball cap on the floor?
Not during the main sessions, no. But before that, I did. So right. I'm still me. I am okay. I'll kind of start backwards. Right now, I'm a pastor in Tucson, Arizona, at a church called Mission Church. Our relationship to you and this denomination begins, probably, I want to say 2016 or 17 or so, through Rod Hugan, another friend and channel regular. I have been meeting with him for a breakfast that's become sort of the big thing in Tucson, where we have a group of young leaders that tend to gather around breakfast here. But he and I started doing that about 12 years ago when I was planting a church. We were not part of the Christian Reformed Church. We were just meeting in a backyard. And slowly I met somebody from the mission agency and ended up becoming a commissioned pastor. And then eventually our church joined the Christian Reformed Church. Anything else you want to know?
Well, why did you leave Synod to go to a baseball game?
Oh, I try to leave as many things as possible and go to baseball games and other concerts and such. So this is actually kind of a big thing about what I bring to the community, though. I love getting together with people. I love spaces where you can connect outside of your work. I think they make work and ministry better. So I'm kind of known in the Resonate world, especially, and some of the other denominational spaces as the one who's always trying to pull people off to do an activity together. So I've gotten in mild amounts of trouble for that, but usually we've created some fun memories. So it's my way of bringing people together, connecting, And often we have some pretty good conversations. Baseball games are great for that. You can't have as deep of a conversation at a basketball game as much as I love basketball.
That's true. That's true. That's very true. All right, Andy, we look forward to your participation this morning. Now, in terms of corner recognizability, visibility, participation between the next two, I'd have to say that Nate comes in next, because Nate has certainly been on the channel. Nate's been on live streams. Nate's been just about everywhere, but Nate really hasn't been the one place that our last person will be, which is why I'm bringing him in last. So Nate, you need even less introduction than Andy, although any close Synod watchers will notice that you gave 2 sermons to the Synod. That's a pretty, that's quite a bit of influence, I think.
More terrifying than I expected it to be.
Nate was also my roommate in the dorms at Redeemer, and I can attest to the fact that he was sweating. He had these sermons to do, and he's like, "This ain't just preaching in front of my church." I said, "Don't worry, Nate. Nobody in the whole audience is going to be sitting back there thinking, what would I have done with this text? Would I have used that illustration? I don't know if I would have said that." Nobody thought any of those things, Nate. Absolutely zero.
Because we know that the only reason people become preachers is because they can't sit still in the pew. And the whole time they're sitting in the pew, they're like, "Oh, I would have said that differently. I wouldn't have said that." And so then we just got to be upfront. Yeah, you're nodding your head, And so then what's it mean to preach to a whole room full of preachers? I'm thinking they're all thinking exactly what I would be thinking if I was sitting there.
But I thought you did a great job. So tell us where you're ministering and what you do and why you're here today.
So I'm at First Christian Reformed Church in Chatham. We were the convening church because we celebrate 100 years of being a church next year in 2026. Chatham is in Ontario. It's about an hour from Detroit. We're in what's called the banana belt of Ontario. You didn't know Ontario had a banana belt, but it does. And so, we just had a heat wave with temperatures up in the mid 30s. I mean, up in the 90s.
That's why Americans think Canada's always frozen over, because you say something like that, and all the Americans are like, heat wave in the 30s in June.
That's right.
Yeah, Canada is polar bears and igloos.
That's right. So, yeah, I think I can leave it there unless you want me to say anything else.
Then we will bring in the big guy, someone who needs probably very little introduction to the corner, because he is actually a regular in Jacob's Corner, Cedric Parcells. Cedric, let's see, how do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm the Reverend Cedric Parcells.
Now, Casey, I muted you because there was quite a bit of noise. I'll unmute you. For the record, who won the sweepstakes? Was it Cedric?
I got bronze from what I heard.
You got bronze? Okay. What people don't understand about Synod, because Casey was keeping score. Do you have that book, Casey?
Hold on.
Because there's a sweepstake in terms of who speaks the most at Synod. That doesn't include chairs and reporters or exec, but from the floor. Go ahead, Casey.
I want to be clear, though. This would help me pay attention. I'm not doing this to make fun of people.
Sure.
Listen, Paul. Scott Elgersmo won the call to question, obviously. So let's just say that.
Those don't count.
Yeah, and Cedric was right near the top, around 15 to 20 times going to the mic. So,
wow.
But in my defense, I had a couple of delegates who came up to me during the session and said they appreciated me. So that was encouragement to stand up there and continue talking.
Probably, especially the point where you said,
they didn't have
humble.
money on the outcome.
I am a humble guy.
The fix was in. A little bit of encouraging Cedric, and we can win the big pot.
Cedric, sometimes people say those things when they're thinking this guy just really needs to know that we're hearing him. maybe if you do that, I'm just saying, there are different motivations for encouraging words.
Yeah, I don't think that was the context.
No.
All right. Well, we are. There is quite a bit of noise, Casey. So I'm going to mute you again. You can just mute and unmute as you chime in.
Is that
I
me?
think that.
I don't think it's me.
I hear voices in the background. Oh, that's Ben. All right, it's Ben. Sorry, Casey. Ben must have a noisy office. I don't know what's going on. So, all right. Well, this is I've decided that we are going to construct this conversation about Synod in estuary style. And what that means is that each of us is going to pitch to the group an introductory topic. And now I think our discussion will focus on Synod, but it doesn't have to be limited to Synod. And so in estuary style, it's very open. You can pitch something that's intellectual. You can pick something that's contextual, and context would probably be Synod or the Christian Reformed Church. You can pitch something that's personal, how you relate, or you can pitch something that's estuarial, and you can say, Vanderclay, I don't know why you gathered us here to talk about Synod and are going to use that darn estuary protocol again. We're just sick of that thing. So you're also allowed to pass on this round, but listen very carefully, because in the next round, you will have to select a pitch that somebody else has made. Now, I think Andy should probably do very well with this, given his affinity to baseball. And Ben, you are first on the mound. You can pass, or you can delay if you want to, because you're probably fairly new at this. I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to be part of an estuary or watch the live stream, but is there a topic you would like to pitch to this group for at least to start the conversation, then the conversation goes where it will?
Yeah, I'll cheat and I'll pick something I've talked about before, which is just, there was a comment at Synod that the relationships between people seems to be a little bit healthier. And I wonder if we might talk about how the conversations over meal times and the relationships that people have outside of Synod affect the kind of deliberative process of a whole bunch of people that don't know each other getting together.
All right. That's a good pitch. Casey, do you have anything you'd like to pitch to the group?
I mean, I had one that was pretty similar to what Ben was going to say, which is just regard to how I think one of the things that happened at Synod was the recognition that your tone is also important. Not just what you're trying to say and whether or not it's supported by scripture, but how you say things is also really important. Some of that came out on the floor, some of that came out elsewhere. I don't know how long we'd run on that. I know that goes off of Ben's. I think the deeper one somewhere down the line might be, has there been a flattening? And I think Nate brought this up actually as a question on the floor. Has there been a flattening between what we declare that the Word of God says, what the confessions say, and what Synod says? And is that going to be problematic down the line? And so somewhere maybe we could get to that, just because I would really like to hear Nate and Cedric especially chat on that guy.
All right.
Andy and I could just talk baseball afterwards. It'll be fine.
There we go. There we go. Andy, do you have anything you would like to pitch?
Well, as every good pitcher knows, you need to trust your catcher. You need to have a relationship of trust. That came up a lot at Synod. A relationship of trust. How, why, how would it happen?
Okay. Trust your catcher. All right. There we go. Nate, as the guy who was on the mound twice for this Synod, do you have anything you'd like to pitch to this group about where to start the conversation?
Well, I don't remember exactly the language, but some of the commentary on Synod is talking about how the CRC is now taking a different direction. And I think there's some merit to that, but I also think it's worth exploring a little bit, because our one way to think about this is the past 3 years, we cut off the head of the denomination. And but organizations aren't like people; they grow new heads, and so we have the leadership has shifted, and the locus of where ideas are coming from has shifted, and I think it's also diffused a bit, where it's less concentrated in one location. And I think it would be interesting to talk about that, because I think this synod was kind of the first, you could say, the first synod under the kind of new, what's going to be, I think, a new version of the CRC once our major intellectual center in Grand Rapids is basically left.
Okay. That is so interesting. All right, Cedric. What have you ever been to an estuary meeting, Cedric?
I have not.
Okay, so this is kind of your first. There's a real debate as to whether online estuary is actual estuary and or just sort of a virtual estuary meeting. But
well, we're not celebrating the sacraments, so I think we're pretty good.
We are definitely not celebrating the sacraments. So, all right, Cedric, what think you?
This is not virtual church. Yeah.
This is not virtual church.
This is a digital ministry.
This is virtually church adjacent.
I think all these are great topics. I guess the topic that I would probably narrow in on for your consideration is...
Now, you're not pointing, you're pitching. Let's be clear. So if you can pass, if you like what's been...
Oh.
So it's up to you what you want to do. All these P words, Paul is giving them to you.
Well, what's a pitch versus...
A pitch is where you bring an idea to the group and you put it on a virtual table. Point is when you look at Ben's idea or Casey's idea or Nate's idea, you try to mix them together.
No.
If you have a new idea you'd like to put on the table, now's the time.
Sure. No, yeah. I would just narrow in on the topic that I think a lot of people were wanting to talk about at this synod, which was the nature of confessional subscription in the Christian Reformed Church.
Oh, okay.
And that's sort of my little ball of wax. So that makes sense for me to want to talk about that kind of thing. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. I will pass. I almost always pass because there are a lot of good pitches and I only pitch if I need to. Ben, of the things that others have said beside yourself, don't forget to unmute. What would you like to point to? Or you can also put things together.
I think I'm going to point at Nate's idea of kind of moving in a different direction. And this is sort of the first direction of the CRC.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Casey, what would you like to point to?
I'm also going to point to Nate's. Anytime someone's making a pitch and they use the word locus, I automatically have to vote for it. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Wow. Wow. Well, we all know how to colonize Nate now. Okay, good. Andy, what would you like to point to?
I'm with Nate as well. The imagery of the chicken getting its head lopped off as our denomination is very compelling.
Severed head always attracts attention. Just remember that when you come to a council meeting. If you bring a severed head, you will definitely have the attention of the room.
It's very Godfather. Yeah.
That's right.
King David certainly did that, you know.
He did. They liked it. Or they didn't. Nate, you have the difficult position of having to point to something other than your pitch, which, quite frankly, might win because you've already got 3 votes out of 6.
I think the relationship of trust would be my... that is hanging around in the room. I mean, how do we learn to trust one another? I mean, there is kind of the when there's a common, we're coming together around an issue, it's kind of easy to then overlook disagreements. But once that issue kind of is resolved, then the question of can we trust each other as we start to recognize the diversity of views in the room does become interesting.
All right. Very good. Cedric, what would you like to point to?
I think I'm going to go with the consensus about is the CRC taking a different direction, because I think that that seems like a good entry point into a lot of the other topics that were talked about.
All right. Well, that's then Nate is now the clear winner. And I must confess that I too was sort of grabbed by Nate's pitch. So Nate, you certainly won the vote. Why don't you expand a little bit on your pitch, and then we'll just take it up. So there's first introductions, which we did, and then we pitch, and then we point, and now we're going to play. So Nate, start us off. What do you mean by a new direction for the CRC?
Well, first, I guess I want to start a little bit reactionary, and because people who are saying the CRC is going in a different direction, obviously, some of those people are wishing that it hadn't. And so then I was thinking, well, but where did the older guard, so to speak, take us? And I thought, I mean, if people are concerned about the newer, more confessional understanding, perhaps, of the CRC, and more enforcement of, or more uniformity even among what office bearers are going to say, well, where did the old regime take us? And I thought there needs to be some reflection on that first. I mean, we look at women in office. No matter where you end up on it, was responsible for the creation of an entirely different denomination out of us, and we never recovered numerically from that. When you look at the RCA, the push towards inclusivity resulted in we heard it from the ecumenical delegate from the RCA, right? That they are now in the messy middle. And it certainly seemed to wear on his face when you looked at him that this was not a comfortable place to be. So that kind of old, the way that the CRC seemed to be going in this direction that the RCA is in, and maybe more fracturing and more dissension, and now the CRC took a different tack, and it seems to me that the future now is more open than it would have been had we pivoted the other way.
There's no more turns now. Anybody can jump in as they will. That comment that you just made right now, the future is more open, I think is really important. And I agree with that. So CRC Voices is a listserv. That's sort of a proto-social media that some of us participate in. And John Tamming, who was at Synod, who's a lawyer from Owen Sound, a church my grandfather pastored, has been a strong voice in terms of the CRC is heading in a bad direction. We are limiting banner editorial freedom. We are limiting the freedom of college professors. The main argument I hear coming from those who are being exiled is that the CRC is going down a narrowing hallway, and you're making the argument that, in fact, we had been going down a narrowing hallway that, in fact, was not only narrowing, but was leading to denominational decline. Your observation that we never recovered from the birthing of the URC. And the denomination, to sort of bring Scott Vanderploeg into this, the denomination has been in free fall numerically, that you're arguing that the future is now more open, specifically because of our, I would say, part of what we've seen is the re-entry of church discipline into the Christian Reformed Church.
It seems that people are not very compelled to be a part of something when it doesn't know who it is. That would be a simple observation. If you don't know who you are, it's hard to rally around. So that doesn't speak to what's right or wrong in that, but I think that it's very true that when you've kind of settled and you've said, this is who we are, that does open things up for people to say, I could be a part of something that knows what it is. I can actually gauge that. I don't want to enter into a thing that's in flux.
I think about that often in terms of a game. Like if you take baseball, everybody agrees to the rules. And then once everybody agrees to the rules, you see who the stars are. And the stars are the people who can find the creative outlet within the rules. And it becomes fantastic. But you don't have a game, and you play like pickup baseball, and everybody's arguing where the foul line is and whether it was actually foul or whether the guy was actually out or not, and eventually you don't ever get around to enjoying the game and seeing the freedom and the possibilities that exist within the framework that's laid out.
Constraint clarifies freedom, right? Yeah. You know where you're free when you know what your constraints are.
I wonder if I can add a comment here.
That's why you're here.
It's true. It's true. I'm trying not to hog the mic, guys.
Well, Casey's taking score. Don't feel any pressure.
I really appreciate what you're saying, Cedric.
Thank you. I'll continue talking then. I think that I also find the point about openness is interesting. I think that a lot of the angst and anxiety. I don't know Mr. Taminga very well, apart from what I heard at Synod, but it seems to me that some of that anxiety is because people are thinking, or they're thinking that this is a return, that there's an attempt to return to like the days of their childhood. Right, when they were they're 12 and 15 years old, and the catechism was rammed down throats and all that kinds of stuff by poorly trained teachers, etc. And Paul, I think you had a video just yesterday that I agreed with. Thank you for the much shorter version of that video that you created. I saw 2.5 hours. I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. But nevertheless, but I don't think that's possible. I don't think it's possible for us to go back. And the people that I talk to, I think that who I mingle with in the Christian Reformed Church, who are more happy with the direction the denomination is going, I think that they realize that the Christian Reformed Church is a very different community facing very different challenges, right? And that is going to require a very different kind of response in this new direction that we're going. So I think that's where some of the anxiety is coming from. And personally, I don't think it's justified yet. I guess we'll see what the future holds. But
I'll speak a little bit more now because I'm not with you all the whole way, but just to refer to another conversation that Paul and Rod and I and Kevin, Silent Bob as he's known, had after Synod. This was unrecorded, but we were talking about how in many ways the new response, as confessional and dedicated as it is, and it is, but it is not the old version, because this new response, this would be one of my labels, is a punk rock response. Which, what I mean by that is it's a rebellion against what the previous generation did that didn't go well. It's not a response of utter return. It's a response of corrective rebellion to some degree. And so it can't be what it was. It will be a different thing. And it really is a different thing. It's coming from a different place. I think we're always cycling. I think we always are kind of probably for good reasons rebelling against what we've seen. So I'm growing here in Tucson. I've got the 20 to 30-year-old children of very liberal parents, and they are rebelling against that and doing things that, it's fun. Like, to go to church is so wrong to their parents, it's like cool, you know? And to go to a really strict church is really cool. Like, it's just like, it's the equivalent of getting a tattoo on your face in previous generations. So I just want to I really do think that dynamic's at play here. So that's interesting.
That is so interesting because, of course, in the broader corner here, there's a lot of conversation going on with respect to orthodoxy, and the serious rebels are going to want to grow their beard long and kiss a box of dead man's bones. That's how, you know, if you're the hardest core against the post-war consensus, you're going to submit to that priest, and you're going to say words of church fathers even older than Augustine or more Greek than Augustine, and so there very much is something to what you said in terms of the rebellion. Of course, the Orthodox themselves will say, see, it's all that rebellion. And the irony, of course, is that their churches are filling up with rebels of a different stripe.
I think that sets up a very interesting dynamic because, and I think we need to name it, and I'm glad you did, because becoming a Christian because you're sticking it to your parents is not the kind of Christianity that's going to last. And I mean, I think everybody has all kinds of mixed motives when they show up to church. And so, and some of maturing in a Christian is kind of realizing maybe I came to church for the wrong reasons, and then realizing what the right reasons are. So, but I think it's interesting to kind of name that, like, are you here? Like, at some point, you got to recognize that you're here for you and for your relationship with God. Yeah, it's a bit of a tangent, I suppose, but I think one that we should be wary of, like people coming in because they want a more traditional religion, or they want to recover maybe what their grandparents had that their parents didn't have. I mean, okay, that gets your foot in the door, but we're not going to be the 1950s CRC.
The same trend is happening not only in the church, but in culture, right? Like, being a former furniture builder, I follow architecture. The same trend is happening there. So granny chic and yacht life and all this stuff, which is like trying to live the way my grandparents lived. And there's a security, there's a sense of stability that comes with that. But it's also in those movements, it's way more aesthetic than it is actual, because you're not really living out of the same, breadth of experience that your grandparents had. And I've heard, especially younger men talk about loving the aesthetic of the strict church, of the high demand religion. So Tucson's we're ahead of the curve on the post-Christian spectrum. So we're probably seeing a little bit more of that, but that's an interesting, it's not just the church that's seeing this. It's all over.
I think an element of this is this rebellion that you're talking about, Andy. I think I think none of us can say that the post-war years hasn't had a huge benefit, right? Like, there's a lot of improvements that have taken place, and not least, race relationships, right? And so all of that is good stuff. I think that the rebellion, though, is coming out of the negative effects of all that, of that period of revolution. I think one of the untalked about, I would be curious to know, being myself the son of parents who were divorced twice. I think divorce probably plays. I think divorce plays a big part of this. Home trauma. I think that there's a great. The word that came to me was, when you talk about security and all these things, was, Roger Scruton talks about how conservatism is built or is birthed out of this desire for home, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that for many people in our society, our homes have been broken, deeply broken by the post-war developments. And I think that there's an attempt to try to, try to say, the home broke. Maybe we need to go back to a time. What did they do right that made it so that we didn't have the divorce rates that we have, and we don't have the family breakdown that we have, etc. So I think that's a big part of the vibe, if you will, of trying to find our way back home.
Very much.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say, I've heard some people describe like the reaction in the CRC as kind of a pendulum swing, that we were moving in one way and we're sort of pushing back the other way. And I sometimes wonder, like, I would identify as a pretty aggressive moderate. And so when I see the pendulum swinging with the sort of speed that it did in the 3 years before the synod, like, that kind of made me a little bit nervous, because it made me think, well, if we're just reacting, we're going to recreate the same problems that created the situation that we're in right now. And it was sort of interesting to see things slow down a bunch at this synod, to say, like, maybe we have actually learned a lesson together and we're trying to refine things a little bit and find a better spot to settle in. And I realize not necessarily everyone might be having that same vision, that we would kind of slow down and settle into a better spot, that maybe they do actually feel that the pendulum needs to swing farther. But that is something that this conversation makes me think about.
I'm the oldest one here, and so I probably have the most memory of the 70s in the Christian Reformed Church. And it's interesting, as I've been working on this banner question, Kuyvenhoven starting in 1980 with burning the wooden shoes. I mean, that lit a fire. But it was interesting because on my speech on the floor on the banner issue, I said that, the two most decisive editions of the banner, of course, one wasn't even the banner, it was the banana. And I didn't know until I made that video that in 1991, Herb Brinks, in an article of the banner, basically names these two issues as sort of the turning points in the CRC. And then in 2016, James Scopp brings up the banana again and reacts to it as a college student at the time, seeing over at Dort instead of at Calvin, the cool college. It's always been the cool college, sorry. At Calvin, at Dort, wishing that they could have, written the banana, because, and then there was this thing that I picked up. I'll have to go and find it, where a conversation with Rusty Reno, when someone had made the observation that a lot of what happens in the 70s was this reaction to the hypocrisy of the mainline churches in the beginning of the 20th century. They were anti-Catholic. They were anti-Semitic. They were racist in terms of African Americans. And a big part of that counterculture was, you people are hypocrites. Now, of course, the ragged edge of that rebellion was the Jesus movement that also swings back hard into a biblicism, into a very open spirituality. And then when you have someone like Peter Thiel basically saying, all of America's problems go back to the hippies. And it's like, I think you're right, Ben, that there's certainly this oscillation going on, which is natural in a human life. It was also interesting in James Scopp's 2016 article in the banner about the banner after the 2015 mandate was recrafted, where he notes his father comes back from the Second World War. And today we would say, we would just assume coming back with likely a fair amount of trauma. And what does he want? He wants probably a stability that hadn't been known since before the First World War. Because, of course, the Second World War has the Roaring 20s, this libertine era. The CRC has the study committee on worldly amusement. And then, of course, you have the Great Depression, which is really where, say, my grandparents got going in their ministry. and then, of course, the Second World War, and then into the 1950s. And so you do see just a lot of oscillation as we look back. And that's where, Nate, your comment really grabbed me in terms of a different direction. And especially your comment, where was the direction that the head that 2022 to 2024 severed? Where was that leading us? And you know, Anselman asked, well, what about the people in the pews of the CRC? Well, I think what worked in the CRC was that the people in the pews were heard in Synod 2022 to 2024. Many of them, at least, probably 75% of them, that no, this direction can't continue. We want a stop. And now I think 2025 is more of kind of a reassessment, but it's a reassessment without some really important voices who have been in the denomination for the last 50, 60 years.
Well, my provocative answer to that, Paul, is I think we're entering into a phase of cultural zombie Christianity, where, and I think that, so to spell that out, I want to be fair, but I think that for people who are baby boomers, their experience of the post-World War II consensus, we're the Christian nation against the atheist communists. That's their formative years. And so basically, generally speaking, what happens in the culture is kind of a working out of Christian moral ethics. And so you see that, of course, in the civil rights movement. Absolutely. You see that in some aspects of the gay rights movement as well, that there needs to be compassion. There needs to be a sense of understanding other people's stories. But somewhere along the way, the culture stopped being Christian in any meaningful sense of the term. And I think Aaron Wren is able to kind of pinpoint that when he talks about the negative world. But I think he's right that but it carries on in this kind of zombie way of, we still talk about love, and we still talk about compassion, and we still talk about like needing to serve, and we still talk about all these Christian sounding things, but they're kind of cut off from their deep Christian roots. And so it's kind of, you're just hearing what's going on in Nate's head here, but when somebody writes in the Christian Courier, we need to support the World Health Organization, and they write that from the perspective of the time when the World Health Organization was first set up to stop a global pandemic. We should partner together, put the best people together, create this institution to monitor things that are going on around the world. But what we have today is not that. It's still called the World Health Organization, but number one, they failed in their number one mission. And they, in response to their failure, wanted to grab all kinds of power and say, well, we want to control what countries can do and blah, blah. That's where this kind of idea of, you have an institution, it has a name, but what's happening inside of it is no longer what it once was. And I think that as much as Calvin and Grand Rapids wanted to talk about cultural discernment, somehow they missed it.
It's interesting that in some ways the counterculture rebelled against the hypocrisy and the failure of the beginning of the 20th century regime to deliver on, probably everybody judges against their imagination of the eschaton. And I think some of this current rebellion is from the children of that generation, is also saying, you failed us. And I think, Cedric, your point about divorce is so critical. You know, domicide. would it have been so? I mean, this is the generation that would like to teach the world to sing, but mom and dad can't even do it enough to stay together. So, cut it out. We don't believe you. I mean, talk about a basic level of all you need is love. Okay, well, you two stood in front of a group of your closest friends and family and declared to everyone that all you need is love, and we have it, and we're going to stay together forever. And within a certain number of years, you were the only other person in the world that you couldn't stand to be with. That was the only other person in the world you couldn't stand to be with. So what do I believe in your ethic of love? You can't live it. So why should I believe you?
Yeah. And this is, I mean, I don't know if you guys want to segue in this direction, but I think that this is, your point about standing up in front of people and taking vows, right? And the questioning of the integrity of people who do that. I think that's an interesting connection here with the question of what does it mean to take vows as office bearers in the Christian Reformed Church, and what does a vow mean in our kind of context? And so I don't know if you want to go in that direction, but it's just sort of an interesting brainwave.
Well, I'm a little curious. So what I liked about Nate's pitch was also, okay, so we basically were under the leadership of a certain group of people, that we raised ourselves, that the CRC circulatory system accumulated into the Grand Rapids area within our institutions. Where were they leading us? So by 1990, with, let's say, the advent of women in office, well, shouldn't that advent had led us in an area of growth? And when you said, Nate, that we never recovered from that. So, I think the vast majority of the members of the Christian Reformed Church were like, is our leadership right track or wrong track? And I think you're right, Nate, that they all said wrong track. Now, the denominations themselves, I mean, that is a big piece of this too, that James Scopp in his 150th anniversary piece in the Dort Journal, talked about the fact that one of the big differences he saw at the 150th was that the CRC no longer basically controls its own weather. The CRC has all of its leaders outside the denomination, whereas H.J. Kuyper, again, James Scopp, the 2016 piece, H.J. Kuyper was the Pope. The denomination coalesced around H.J. Kuyper and the reform and Americanization project that he led, the bringing in of hymns, Christian schools, all of these things H.J. Kuyper brought in. And now people listen to John Piper or Nadia Bolz-Weber, or, I mean, the CRC is just, in what way does the denomination, is it actually a thing?
Yeah, it feels, and this will be my last comment before I sign off. I'll say two things here, but it feels as a kind of a newcomer to the denomination that there's a group that is really, probably in the more, I think idealizes the URC and the Reformed Baptists and stuff like that, but they're still with us. And then there's a group that, your Nadia Bolz-Webers and stuff, but they're still with us. And then there's probably is a group that really is just CRC to the core, but that feels very small. So that acknowledgement is really, really important. Just to Cedric's point, that's probably a whole nother topic all its own. But one of the first questions that came to my mind, I think you're onto something with the divorce in the background and how that might, tie into confessional alignment. And a question, I think I would hear this happening on the floor of Synod too. There might be a group that's saying the problem with my parents' divorce is they weren't clear on the vows. And the problem with the church is we're not clear on the vows. And then there might be another group that says, no, they had the vows. They said the vows. but they didn't love each other. And that's the problem. The problem is the relationships, and that's a whole nother conversation, but I just want to speak to the validity of that. I think there's a lot there. So thank you for having me.
All right, Andy, thanks for coming in.
Of course, the challenge now that he's gone is I have to respond to what he has to say. I agree with Andy that that's part of it. I think another dimension of it also is a re-questioning of just the whole culture of no-fault divorce and the social mechanisms that were in place that helped to maintain relationships and marriages and keep people acting with integrity to vows that they made. I think that's also another element of this. You can't, I mean, human beings as good Calvinists, sorry, Jacob, as good Calvinists, we all are, believers in total depravity. I think that the natural tendency of the human race is towards self-destruction. And we need, but God in his common grace, provides us with external structures that help to keep us from living into the worst of our propensities. And I think that perhaps some of those things were torn down over the last 60, 70 years. And the result has been what we see around us that we are reacting to in some ways. And so we're looking to rebuild some of those structures. Obviously, there are negative. I'm not saying it's not a return to the way things were completely per se, because that had its negative downs. It had its negative stuff as well. But talking about pendulum swings, it could be that, the sense is that the pendulum swung too far, right, in terms of liberation and too much towards chaos, and not towards not enough order. So,
but we are also kind of moving in a direction of decentralization, and that's interesting too. Like, without a solid Grand Rapids hub, where is the locus of leadership within the denomination going to be? I think that's still kind of up for negotiation.
Casey, you unmuted. Go ahead.
I want to come back to Nate's point on that, because again, he used the word locus, and I just can't. It's incredible.
It's your trigger word.
It's a trigger word for me. So I think, generally speaking, we're in the kind of the same boat. We have the same mentality about we're not going back to the 1960s. Great. Except that there are people in our denomination who have recently left our denomination who are like, that's exactly what you're doing. Tell me how it's different. And I think that's the question that I'd like to pose to get answers to. If there are 1 to 2 ways that you can point to that we're not going back, because like with Cedric, I hear what you're saying with regard to the vows have to mean something. Now, if I'm going to go far to the extreme end of that and paint it in a negative broad stroke, I'm going to go, yeah, Cedric wants to get rid of divorce. So let's just have everybody make vows, and even if they're miserable, they'll stay married and they'll live in different houses, like in the different rooms of the house. Or you know what I mean? We don't want to go back to that, but explain to me how. And I think, Nate, you're kind of touching on some of that with regard to, like, yeah, there is no one hub right now. That's one of the key differences. The number of people right now in the CRC who are engaged in these kinds of conversations, that have their own YouTubes, they have their own Substacks, they have their own podcasts, right? I watch Paul more than I read the banner at this point. And I learn more about church history stuff from Paul talking about his experience and his grandparents in these little stories, or from Rod Hugan talking about things, than I have from the banner, right? So the loci is dispersed is probably one difference, but I wonder what the other differences are. That if someone were to say it's going exactly back to what it was, you're trying to Handmaid's Tale this whole thing. We're not, but what can we point to that makes it different?
Go ahead, Ben.
I think like one thing I would say is I'm going to use a word that might trigger people, but one thing that I've kind of observed about the CRC right now is diversity. And I think one of the sort of crises we navigated was that we had a little bit too much theological diversity between some of our groups to really hold together. And so we've done some sort of sorting to figure out, okay, there's a certain level of theological agreement we need to have. And if you're not on board with that, then you can't really be a part of our community together. And I wonder if what's different is that I don't think that the coalition that's led the CRC in the direction that it is wants to see every church look exactly the same. Like in the back of my mind, I have this idea of this sort of classically reformed, standard, fairly traditional Christian Reformed church. And yet I don't see a big push to replicate like the form of that in every other congregation. I think about this with Classis Arizona a lot because they're very different from the average CRC church. And yet I don't see a big push of people trying to impose on them to have them change a lot of what they're doing, provided there's this sort of base level of theological agreement. And so I wonder if what's different for the 60s is like in the 60s, there was much more uniformity of practice and of culture between churches, and we rebelled against that. And then as we sort of swing the pendulum back, there isn't the same desire for conformity in every area, but there is a recognition that like there's some places where we really can't disagree and still function together as a denomination, whatever that ends up meaning.
I think that's very true. There is so much diversity in the Christian Reformed Church right now. And one of the things that I saw immediately was that the former head of the denomination that tended to be boomer white was, completely out of line and with many of the more diverse elements of leadership in the denomination. If you go to Synod, if you want to see some people that are really excited about the new direction, look at Hispanics and Koreans. They are, if you want to find a real fight, remove some of that language barrier. And I think a lot of white people would just kind of be, that in alignment with, we need to listen to people of color and put ourselves under submission to them. And it's like, really? Is that what you want? Because if I listen to my Korean brothers and sisters and my Latin brothers and sisters, they're breathing fire. It's just, you're not getting the fire because they're wrestling with English. And so I think that's right, Casey. And I also think it's right, Ben, in terms of the diversity. Part of what we're wrestling with is diversity on every score, and how, in fact, can diversity be managed? And this gets to the denominational thing too. I just wrote a piece on CRC Voices this morning about, I really think we did this wrong in 2022 to 2024. I think we would have been better if we had, say, started with something like the Great Lakes Catechism, which is a catechism written that comes out of Kuiper College, that is very clear in terms of its traditional commitment to traditional stances of human sexuality within the church. And if the CRC had said, here's a confession, because it's really interesting if you listen to Daniel Meter in a video that he did a little while ago, those old confessions. I'm responding also to Clay Leibold's recent piece. Clay has now jumped to Substack, which is interesting in and of itself, but his recent piece about confessionalism, I thought Clay made a lot of good points. And I think the cleaner, more honest way for the CRC to go at this would have been to say, here's a confession. This is going to be one of our confessions, and we're going to be under this. And then at least it would have been cleaner. What the RCA, of course, did was say that all those, the three forms of unity, those were expressions of the Reformed tradition. Well, what does that mean? How does that govern today? And the CRC looked at that and said, that's kind of a non-functioning statement. Why are you making it non-functional? Let's just be honest about what we do and don't believe. In around 2011, 2012, I started calling on my blog, which had a lot less visibility than my YouTube channel. we need a confessional conversation, because there are confessional issues at play, and the denomination is going like this. Now, what happened was the Human Sexuality Report, and everything collapsed on that. But as many people have said, the Human Sexuality Report really isn't a confessional document. It's a biblical study. And so where this locus really lies in the CRC is we have different readings of Scripture on this matter. And so it's at exactly that level that confessions can be useful to make a distinction. And then if you make the distinction cleanly, and we can say, this is the line, now whatever happens to this severed member of the Christian Reformed Church that has been severed over the last 3 previous synods, now maybe we can say, okay, now that we have a confessional difference, how can we continue to relate productively with each other, instead of redoing what happened in the 1990s, which was the URC flew off, and the leadership of the Christian Reformed Church almost, basically said, and almost openly, sure are glad they're gone. That's what happened in the 90s. And as Dave Snapper has said many times on CRC Voices, that wasn't right. And I don't want us to redo. In fact, I think actually we're doing better than we did in the 90s, but that work is just beginning. And I've killed the stream.
Well, I'm sorry I had to jump out. I'm at church and all that kind of stuff.
I get it.
Yeah.
Trust me, I get it.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if hindsight's always 20/20, and I don't know if we could have done things differently between 22 and 24. I think part of that was working out some of the dynamics that existed, as you pointed out, in our denomination, of a well, I'll just put it bluntly. I think that there was a lot of the head was not listening to the rest of the body, right? And you see this at the very beginning of 2008 with the revised form of subscription, which basically wanted to, if it had been adopted, now there would have had to be church order changes, but if it had been adopted, it basically would have pushed the Christian Reformed Church even closer towards the RCA.
Yeah.
And made the confessions basically historical documents that we're supposed to refer to on some kind of guidance level, whatever that means. And the denomination for 5 years, Casey in our committee at Synod talked about the word fully agree with the word of God, right? And 5 synods basically told the people who were, part of it was basically said, you need to put this language back in there, right? We don't want to move in that direction. And for 5 years in a row, there was resistance from our head, if you will, intellectual leaders and things like that, who said, no, children, this is not the way that we're going to do this. And that was, I think that there was a lot of trust already lost, right, in the Christian Reformed Church post the Women in Office conflict. But that was a huge loss of trust, I think, for many sections of the Christian Reformed Church when that was being debated and being brought up. I mean, one dimension of this is, I've been thinking about this, and I think I shared this with you once before, Paul, at Synod, but I think there's a lot of this older, I'll call them older, this older group of people who were in charge of the direction of the Christian Reformed Church. Now, not all of them, because not all of them grew up within the Christian Reformed Church. I don't think Reggie grew up in the Christian Reformed Church. I might be wrong about that.
Reggie Smith?
Yeah, Reggie Smith. Did he grow up in the Christian Reformed?
Yeah.
Oh, he did? Oh, okay. But, my sense is that a lot of this was working out the immigrant psychology. I mean, there's such a pressure to Americanize, to assimilate, to become part of the country, and I just sort of see that as what does that mean? Well, for a certain group of people, it meant joining the mainline church, becoming a mainline organization, and so we have let's get on board with the World Communion of Reformed Churches, because it's sort of what's the other big ecumenical organization that's really liberal and always says all kinds of interesting things? The World Communion of Churches, sort of adjacent to that, right? Let's get on board with the Belhar because the RCA is doing. Let's mingle our.
The Belhar was because of the connections in the 1980s divestment movement at Calvin, where I was, and with Alan Bozak, and the relationship between Alan Bozak and the elites at the college and in the denomination. And so the Belhar was seen as this gift, and here we've never adequately thanked them for the gift. But of course, the story of Alan Bozak, to go back to Nate's pitch, I think people looked at what happened with Alan Bozak, and they looked at what happened with John Sook, and they looked at the sort of the deconstruction of a whole layer of people who have been products of the main Christian Reformed formation movements. A colleague out here in California made a comment to me that, when we get to the degree that the circulatory system was still working, by the time someone gets out here from Calvin College, half of them are half deconstructed already. And it's like, are our systems creating the kind of robust Christians that can really engage the culture, which was ostensibly the Reformed project of the post-war consensus? Or are they just simply part of the emergent movement, and then they're either going mainline, deconstructing, going young, restless, and reformed, and now all the way to the bottom, hitting orthodoxy? I mean, that's what has rolled out. And the portion of the Christian Reformed Church that has seemed to last longer has been something closer to that old rootstock in rural America. And I think, and so, just from a demographic point of view, part of what changed the Christian Reformed Church was the older communities held their own better. And then, two of the people on this live stream didn't grow up CRC, but one way or another were attracted to it and are still with it.
I sometimes wonder about, like, the CRC used to do formation pretty strongly, and someone made a comment earlier about kind of inadequate catechism teaching, which I understand that the system sort of broke down, but at one point in time it was like you could not get out of a CRC as a young person without having some understanding of what was in the Heidelberg Catechism and not having it shape you in some way, and that even if you rebelled against that in the future, you still always lived with that formation in your head in some way. And I feel like having a root system like that means that when you encounter difference or you wrestle with things, you always kind of have this grounding, whether you acknowledge it or not, that keeps you from sort of totally going off the rails. But if you forget how you were formed and how valuable that was to the shape that you take eventually, then you look at the wrestling and the deconstruction that you do differently, not acknowledging how important your roots and your formation were. And one thing I always feel is, I minister in Canada and I work with a lot of people who were part of the Canadian CRC when it was doing that formation really strongly, and that formation still is paying dividends now, regardless of kind of where people are. And I wonder if sometimes people forgot about that, and that's part of what led us to be comfortable with this wrestling with things in a way that has actually ended up being destructive because it was missing this sort of root behind it.
Well, Rod Hare didn't grow up CRC, but was adjacent to Whitensville. And he asked this question, which, Rod, I read your questions and I star them so I can go back to them because they're incisive. is it possible that the conventional religious life simply is no match for the media-saturated age, renegotiating relations between sexes, unfettered capitalism, etc.? And I think, Rod Dreer's Benedict option comes into this piece here, because I think people look back and say, when we had walls, when again, that 2016, you haven't read James Scott's 2016 article about the banner. When he, on the way home after participating in a pickup basketball game on the Sabbath, has to sit out and let his shirt dry because he's terrified about going. He's terrified, but he doesn't want to go home with a sweaty shirt because his parents are going to know you've just played basketball on the Sabbath. Now, I remember that church, and I very much understand why that group of people looked at that and said, isn't there some hypocrisy in that Sabbatarianism? And surely there was. But what's so interesting is if you look at like the based camp, husband and wife who are trying to fashion their own religion, one of the things that they say is you need an arbitrary binding. And in many ways, that Sabbatarianism kept Christian Reformed Church people feeling we have come out from the rest of the world. The Baptists go out to eat on Sunday. Russ's is closed. But as the CRC sort of moved out into the culture, well, what is our way? And the old confession of the post-war consensus, which was that C poll at Calvin, which is we're going to every square inch for Christ. And so we're going to have movie reviews in the banner. But very quickly, nobody could sense, is the movie review in the banner any different from the movie review in any other magazine? At least when we didn't go to movies, we knew who we were. And I remember it was so interesting that my wife grew up, her father was Lutheran, her mother was Baptist, Grand Rapids Dutch Baptist, and her mother would watch TV, but she wouldn't watch movies on TV because that might affect her witness. And I just came in thinking, who's knowing whether or not you're watching movies on TV? And that would affect your witness. When I look at what else you're watching on TV, what's the distinction between the stuff you're watching and a movie on TV because you don't want to watch movies? Yeah, you'll go out to Brands in Granville on Sunday afternoon with all of your other Baptist people, and you look at the Christian Reformed people like they won't even go shopping for groceries on Sunday.
There's something about the kind of hothouse experience of having a period of time within a community that's very closed that I think is really important. And I don't really know how you get the good part of religious formation without in some way being really strongly shaped like that and then having it stick with you in that way. As weird and as inconsistent as it might be, like you have to have something that holds you against the sort of onslaught of the rest of the stuff that you encounter in your life to understand, if you're reformed, what makes you reformed? Like, how can you explain that? How can you articulate that?
And I think, how do you explain that? One person I've been reading has been Sam Chan, who's an evangelist out of Australia. He wrote this book, Evangelism in a Skeptical Age. And he said for people from an Asian culture, coming to Christianity liberates them from their superstitions, and also from and then the grace theology of Christianity, also from this really works-driven, success-driven type culture as well. But then he says, when I look at like Western people who left Christianity, they don't see Christianity as a liberation; they see Christianity as a confinement, and I think we brush up against that, even though we still want to recognize that there's freedom within, like that freedom actually requires these rules and these ways of being in the world. Like that, I mean, were we better off as Sabbatarians getting in trouble for playing basketball, or are we better off now where the second church is over, people are gone because they're trying to do all the things that they didn't get to on Saturday because their lives are like beyond busy as they chase after the well, it used to be because they were chasing after a better life. Now I think it's just, how do I maintain the middle class life now with two people working and everything else? It's incredibly busy. So to look at, I think there is maybe a little bit of a nostalgia of, it was a little bit nicer when everything was closed, so I couldn't go to the bank, so I won't. And so maybe that is kind of a bit of the swinging back. But I did want to think about, so we have this kind of diverse or diffuse leadership, and part of that is the church planters themselves, and this whole group of people who aren't going to seminary. And, Synod, I haven't heard much commentary about this in the post-Synod thing, but I think this is incredibly significant that leadership, the leadership channel now is not necessarily through seminary, whether it's in Grand Rapids or somewhere else. And we were hearing this, we had this long discussion about what do you do with a person who has special gifts, and how we've shut that door and we've said, no, we gotta funnel them through. But I think this is connected, because I think the people who went through the university system and the seminary system and the PhD university system are the very people that people looked and said, you're taking, like, that's the head we cut off. So I thought that church planter, how are we going to deal with a secular university system that doesn't really, has completely severed its ties from the Christian roots? It can no longer be like, you study philosophy, get a philosophy degree at a secular university. Are you even going to touch Augustine? Maybe, maybe not. So for the future kind of educated clergy, where are they going to get their education? And maybe it's going to be, maybe we're going to hear more and more of this. They got to learn from other pastors rather than they got to go to the academy. I don't know.
I thought one of the most interesting moments at Calvin, or at Synod, was the pivot of Calvin, because of course Calvin has been in many ways the head within the head in the Christian Reformed Church. Calvin was the crown jewel of the Christian Reformed Church, and in this transition, I've really wondered, well, what's going to happen to Calvin? And the message we got, of course, John Tamming. It's not Tamminga, it's just Tamming. John Tamming, that horrified him, and he had a strong post on Voices yesterday about this. That, well, even Calvin has caved in now, and I think though. Go ahead, Casey.
Oh no, Nate shot back already this morning. Oh. On Voices. Sorry, Paul,
okay.
to interrupt.
Yeah, I saw that. But
I got something after you're done.
To me, is that to me sort of brings about this, because one of the things I thought about is, what's Calvin's path forward? Is Calvin's path forward continuing to be to try to compete with state universities or the Ivy League? Or does this constraint now, will this constraint afford something for Calvin to actually do something interesting? It's been interesting for me. I had never really heard much about Hillsdale College, but since I've been in the corner, since, I've watched all of these things, Hillsdale was out there, and it's like, well, what's going on there at Hillsdale? And I'm not saying Calvin should be another Hillsdale, but I thought, well, at least Calvin is trying to have a future, and that future, as I think many of these things that we're talking about, that future is going to have to have a considered restraint that gives it definition, that gives it purpose, and that constraint will then hopefully create something of particular value that people will say, oh, Calvin means this. And I think Calvin did mean something in the post-war consensus, but I think that consensus is done. And if Calvin's going to continue to express leadership in the Christian world, it's going to have to figure something out.
It is pretty fascinating that we are in this place where there is more and more conformity around the creeds and confessions, right? And we want that to centralize who we are and then spread out from that. At the same time, the number of institutions and organizations that had held us together are now, we've decentralized. They're like, back to Nate's point of the head has been cut off, right? Like, I'm going to say what you want about GRE. They led for a long time, and not everything that they did was awful. And now that main piece is gone. And people have been looking side-eyed at the banner, which has had its mandate changed, at the college, at the seminary. Fewer people are going to seminary. We heard on the floor of Synod, you got to train more people to be licensed to exhort. We got to raise up more church planners where they are. So the training and the teaching around this being confessionalism has been decentralized also. And so, like, my question is, how do you maintain and do that? And then secondly, so where is the leaders going to come from? I mean, maybe it's better that it's not all significantly focused in one particular area with one particular class. Okay. And yet there's a bit of a vacuum of that much power and influence in the denomination. So who's going to lead? Right? I don't always agree with him. I don't know him personally, so I don't want to call anybody out. But there was one voiceless person who's always like, there's no leadership in our denomination. And like, what are you talking about? They're all over and you should follow, right? But I guess those two things, how are we going to hold to the confessional centralization that we seem to be wanting to have when the main institutions that help bring us to that point do not have the influence that they used to have?
See, I think this is gonna, I think all of this chatter around confessional alignment is bullshit.
Paul,
I'm not saying the people are lying.
Cedric's right here, dude.
I'm waiting to hear what he has to say before I chime in.
My role in the CRC.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
I'm not saying that the confessions are bullshit.
Patient,
let me be clear on
that. I want to build trust.
And also you're humble.
I'm saying that we had in a lot of ways, Rod Dreher was right. When I was reading Dreher 10 years ago, and when Obergefell happened, he's like, this is a watershed moment. I thought, really? I think it was. And I think it is in the CRC because we've used the word confessionality because you use the Heidelberg Catechism to execute this move and sever the head in this way. And that's the way the line fell. And the line wasn't ever really about gay couples. The line was about, I think, a certain kind of cultural alignment. And we've used the confessions as a way to distinguish, to draw a line here. But I don't really find that the confessions themselves are where that line is, which is why for a decade now I've been saying we need a confessional conversation, and we probably need some new confessional working. And I'm not saying that's out of alignment with our old confessions. I'm saying we very much want to be in alignment with the tradition. It's what we're trying to do. But I don't think you're going to find in the confessions. I mean, we had to dig deep into the Heidelberg Catechism to say, chastity. That's how we can make this move. And I think, again, it would have been cleaner if we had adopted something like the Great Lakes Confession and say, here's a line. And we might say something like, we're not exactly sure how the church's traditional posture on human sexuality is foundational. We might not be able to explain it, but we do know that it's probably true that we can't have competing ideals around family and human sexuality and keep the same ecclesiastical body.
So when Andy started our conversation, right, and he was like, well, we didn't know what we were. Not entirely true. It's that there were two competing views for who we were that were going on, that is what you're saying.
Yes. And I don't think we can actually articulate it, which is why I think we need to do confessional work. But I think it became abundantly clear that the division that was emerging in the Christian Reformed Church, which has now been illuminated and activated, that division has to do with, how do we read Scripture? How does the Bible interact with the world today? What postures does that create? What institutions does that create?
Yeah.
And to sort of point back to 16th century and 17th century confessional documents, I think we used that because we could, because that machinery was at hand. But I don't think they weren't fighting over what we're fighting about. And so I don't think the confessions really align so much in that. I think the confessions are sort of on our side of the line, but I think we need to do a lot more if we're going to figure out how this works. But again, as Rod Hare is saying over in the comments here, what does that mean? Because, nobody's looking at the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and saying, well, so what you're telling me is, well, maybe the Catholic Church, what you're telling me is that you're just on the verge of blessing gay weddings. I mean, look at how that's roiling in the Catholic Church. So there's a lot more going on here than we can articulate. And I think what we sort of did was, this all came up, and I agree with you, Cedric. I don't know how we could have avoided this fight. When Nealon made the move they had, and, in the midst of COVID, it was like, and I was frustrated with the leadership, because I was basically looking at the leadership and saying, you're not dealing honestly with the rest of the church. You're really not. And I think that dishonesty provoked the distrust and hence the severing of the head. And I think we're quickly in Synod 2025 looking for a space for more honesty and more trust. And I think Synod 2025 helped sort of re-solidify that. But I don't think we're actually been able yet to deal with everything that we need to deal with now, which includes, as Rod's been when talking about in the comments, what on earth is a denomination? Because that's changed.
So now that I've been patient and I've allowed trust to be built, I do think that I did listen to you.
I know you did.
So I agree with you that there are many variables, to use that word, that need to be addressed, that still are at work here, that need to be. And I think that the question of a new confession, it's one of the things that drives me up the wall, actually, is the degree to which the Christian Reformed Church in its history has been reticent to change its confessions, right? It's like, look, if you don't like the stuff that's said about the Anabaptists, just take it out, right? Like, this isn't rocket science. So, no. So
we did question and answer 80.
I know, and then they put it in brackets. And personally, I think they got that wrong, but that's another question. So that's that. But I want to push back a bit on the statement that you think that the confessional alignment bit is, I forget the exact full.
I said bullshit, but bullshit. Proxy is probably a better word.
Yeah. I don't think that's entirely accurate. At least for me and for many people that I've interacted with, I do think that there is a genuine love for our confessional tradition, and we do want to see the confession, that entire confessional tradition, to be embraced and celebrated. I mean, as you mentioned, I did not grow up in the Christian Reformed Church. I came into it in large part because I came out of a context that was the Episcopal Church in the United States, sort of the analogous to the Anglican Church of Canada, which is just so deconfessionalized. It's ridiculous. And so one of the things that brings me into the Christian Reformed Church is a deep appreciation for your confessional tradition, for our confessional tradition, and the level of commitment that we expect of it, right? To it. So I do think that this is something that people such as myself and adjacent to myself who are going to want to encourage and to strengthen in the Christian Reformed Church moving forward. And I think this also plays into the part of who are the voices that we've listened to growing up and being formed by, right? It's going to be people like R.C. Sproul. It's going to be people like Carl Trueman. It's going to be, these voices who are very much advocates of a more confessional.
And none of them CRC.
No. Yeah, well, but the point though is that they're still being influenced by this, right? So and those of us who are now in relative positions of leadership, right? I do think that's so. I don't think it's completely. I wouldn't be as cynical about saying that it was just a proxy kind of thing. I think that there's definitely a sense that no, this is a foundational. That this is a movement back towards the confessionality. Personally, I would not have chosen unchastity as the word. I think that the word marriage in Heidelberg Catechism 107, 108 should have been the focus. But nevertheless, it is what it is. So
right.
That's my pushback for you.
All right.
But...
So I said something. Cedric pushed back. What do the rest of you think?
Well, I'm curious if there are going to be other aspects of the confessions that all of a sudden set off these similar fireworks. And that's I'm wondering if that's kind of what you're saying, Paul, is we had a particular cultural crisis when it came with legalization of same-sex marriage that then churches had to respond to one way or the other. But when I think about other things in the confessions, like don't use images as teaching aids for the unlearned. Nobody in the denomination, nobody follows that.
So I could be brought up on charges. Have you seen my sermons?
Yeah. And I don't anticipate that changing. I think that's one of, so there is kind of, there always is that kind of, how do the confessions live, right? Within our, and there's some parts that we bring forward, like Lord's Day 1 and I am not my own. But there are other parts that do kind of fade into the background. Like if you want to put images up on your PowerPoint when you're preaching, even an image of Christ, probably you're not going to get a visit from your elder saying, look, you shouldn't do that. And I think that's okay. So I my concern that I said at Synod, and I still hold it, is we have created this new toolbox that Synod can use now to bring about conformity among office bearers. And I remain concerned that we don't have any rules for how we're going to use those tools that have always kind of existed in the background. Like we've always been able to modify our confessions. And then of course, when you do that, that does impact everybody. But is this something when I say it's wide open, I think it's wide open. We could say, hey, we have these tools, but we're not going to use them very often at all. Or it could be that every Synod, there's going to be somebody with an axe to grind trying to say, hey, this aspect of the confessions, like it now, we have to define that more clearly so that everybody's on the same page. And anxiety does that.
Yeah. And we won't. And the reason we won't, then I'm going to let Ben talk. The reason we won't, because again, this was a proxy. Because it's not you've made my point for me. So thank you, Nate. Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say it strikes me as kind of the sorry, in American politics, things are kind of deadlocked right now. And so there's been a reliance on using the judiciary and interpreting the Constitution to try and get things changed or get things dealt with properly, when there is the option to actually, gather in the legislature and make new laws and put things in place that way. And it does feel like in this case, like there was sort of a way of using the confessions to kind of deal with this issue like quickly and efficiently. But now that we've kind of got a different room present, there's a different kind of vibe going on at Synod, that there might be the opportunity to have some of these more kind of legislative type conversations where we can talk together about things beyond just what's present in the confessions. And I say this in the context of the virtual church report, actually, because one of the things that was difficult about making the report and then presenting on the floor of Synod is that I think if you just go to the confessions for a definition of what the church is, you get a picture and some things that are very important, but there are like some of the best arguments against virtual church are not really confessional arguments. And I wonder if we need to be able to say, we can't only go to the confessions for resolving our disagreements, that we need to actually be able to make decisions together about what we believe Scripture says the church is supposed to be and what we think that should look like going forward. That's kind of what I hope will happen in the next couple of years, but we'll see.
All right. Well, part of that, I think, requires us to become more well-versed in our tradition more generally, right? Like the confessions, part of the concern of many people about this emphasis on confessionalism. Therefore, there's going to be this tight clamping down on opinion and diversity of thought. The confessions from the 16th century, they've created sort of parameters for the tradition that you can see in the 17th century, 18th century. There was loads of diversity. There were plenty of things that people could disagree about and argue about. My favorite one is I think it's Gomarus at the Synod of Dort, right? Challenges someone to a duel, right, over something that they were said, and not that was a good idea, but the point is that I think there needs to be a depth of greater engagement with the tradition to see how were our confessional commitments worked out in our tradition, right? And so the beautiful thing about it is that a lot of stuff in the last 35 years or so has become more and more translated, right? So now we have Bavinck and a whole new stuff. When I was in Canada, I bought the Kuyper volumes, but also the Synopsis Purioris, stuff that's just being Van Maastricht is all being published in English now. Yeah. And I think that gives an opportunity for us to sort of relearn some of those things.
I'm gonna get closing thoughts, and then I'm gonna drop the link. So I'm not gonna go in order of closing thoughts, but you all get one. What's your summing thought before we bring in whoever's going to join us in this kind of? And you're free to go if you're out of time. That's fine. I want to thank you all for participating in this. When I drop the link, it becomes a free for all, and some of you know how this goes, some of you don't. And then I'll tie it up at some point in the future. And
I can start. We're going to be dead.
Well, Job's point here is interesting because Job, of course, is in the Netherlands. He's an elder in one of the Dutch Reformed churches. The weird thing is that most people in my church would have no idea about Bavinck, Gomarus, and maybe they've heard of Kuyper. And that's to Cedric's point that maybe I overstated for dramatic effect, but Cedric has a point that the tradition. One of the things the Christian Reformed Church has done, and I think it did well before the post-war consensus really got hold, was it loved the catechism. And it preached all over the Christian Reformed Church. That evening service, it preached the catechism again and again and again and again and again and again. And that, especially the catechism, deeply formed the Christian Reformed Church, that element of the church that perhaps still exists in some places in rural America and Canada, but has for the most part passed. And so your point's well taken, Cedric. Thank you. But okay, first closing comment. Ben, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to kind of go back to Nate's original question of like what the new direction of the CRC looks like. I don't know that I necessarily have an answer, but I'm really curious to see, having had this sort of chaos, and what particular direction things actually take going forward, that as we have a better sense of who we are, that might be interesting to see what we do next.
We will do something next. And if the Lord tarries, we will see what we do. So you're right. Thank you, Ben. And thanks for coming on today. I got to get you and your sister on, because I'd love to hear your story. Anyone else? Closing comment.
I can jump on a little bit. I don't think I'd mentioned women in office earlier. I don't anticipate that getting relitigated in the CRC as it is now. I do think that I noticed in the comments somebody asked about women clergy and the CRC. They tend to be more conservative even than people like me sometimes, and so there is a kind of an interesting a dynamic there. I'd say I'm optimistic, and I did buy a pickup truck after Synod was over. Maybe that was a way of dealing with the stress of it all. That's where I'll leave it.
And the Canadian banana belt, where they don't actually grow bananas. So maybe bananas, but not bananas. Right. All right, Cedric or Casey, final thought?
I'm going to go because I want Casey to have the final word. But final thought is, as one thing that we didn't really delve into, but I feel like it sort of touches on a few things, is I do think that there is going to be some conversation about worship. I do think there is going to be some conversation about the implementation of the second commandment in the years to come. So I do think that, some others have made the point on this, in this little corner here, about, it's not, and I think even Aaliyah from your classes has made the point, like, there's a theology. What's the purpose of theology? The purpose of theology at the end of the day is to teach you how to pray, right? And I think that, so it has to give birth to a form in order to not only mature and to mature itself, right, but also to sustain itself. And so I think that one of the questions we're going to have is as this emphasis on a more confessional Reformed theology takes place, what is the form that it's going to find expression in worship? So
yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Thank you, Cedric. All right, Casey, you get the final word. Then I'm bringing Job on.
Oh boy. We've had this conversation about proxy. We've had this conversation about the head getting lopped off. I have friends that are on the other side of this thing, and I just want us to be careful. How do you act when you win? How do you act when it goes your way? And so that doesn't mean that it's all going to be okay. We all hold hands and it's all going to continue to work out. The changes that had to happen had to happen. But also, what does it mean then to live and work well, to have a good tone with those that we're still in alignment with? And can we be as gracious as we possibly can with those we disagree with? That's my hope and my concern. Yeah, and as Nate's kind of said and driven the whole conversation, right? Like, things have changed and there isn't one area of focus. I'm also heartened by, as I've already said, the number of people who are putting out content and trying to work their way through things. The opportunity for there to be many voices to figure things out as we move ahead. and the voices of, dissent even now or contrary things, I'm heartened to have been at Synod, where I had to report as a reporter, and Cedric ghost wrote most of my stuff. So thanks, Cedric. Where Paul got up and said, I like what was written here. Here, it's great. And 5 minutes later, Nate got up and said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. I don't understand why you guys can do this. There's something wonderful about being at Synod and looking each other in the eye and disagreeing, but agreeing to move forward together. And that we could be gracious with one another, that we could be gracious with those who have left. That's my hope.
All right. I thank you, Casey. And I think it's something to reflect on, that the losers of the war of the 2020s in the CRC were the winners of the war of the 1990s, which should, I think, speak to what Casey just said, that how you win not only will impact your relationship with the losers, but it'll really shape who you are. And I think the deafness, what was shocking in the end of the 20 teens, when All One Body basically said, it's the judicial path. We're going to follow the judicial path, and we're going to get the local option with respect to human sexuality. I was reading that. I'm thinking, they're out of their minds. But why would they have thought that? They would have thought that because they were the winners of the 1990 war. And part of the reason they lost this war, which is a classic thing, they were fighting the last war, and they didn't understand what this war was, and they lost badly. So it's good. It's a good word, Casey. All right, I'm going to bring in now. Job is an elder in the Netherlands, and Job has his own things going on there. So, Job, what did you hear, and what are your thoughts?
Oh God, I have no idea. I haven't followed Synod at all. Did we win?
Did we win?
Like honestly, I don't know. Honestly,
yes.
I don't know. Woo! All right, go Team CRC.
We all won. Everybody won.
Excellent. Yeah. In the end, it's all for the glory of the Lord, isn't it? Boy. Yeah. So I have no idea. I think something about Abide. Their side won or something. Like I've seen some stuff come through. Oh, hey, Jacob. All right, man. I haven't seen you in forever.
It's been forever. How are the kids?
They are growing and healthy. It turns out if you feed them regularly, they get bigger. It's amazing. So
all right. So Job, you didn't hear much of the CRC news, which is understandable, surely. But you came on to share some thoughts, or did you just give us an update? Or your kids, or did you just want to be part of the conversation?
Could just be. I got a new book, which is really, really nice. It's called. So it's just translated. It's called Every Moment Holy by Douglas McKelvey. See. I thought this was like some Tish Warren wide-brimmed sun hat stuff that wouldn't particularly be my vibe, as the kids say. But it turns out it's really good. It's got all these liturgies, like a liturgy for communal work, and a liturgy to write fiction, and a liturgy to make a culinary meal, and a liturgy for employees, and a liturgy for changing diapers, which is applicable, and a liturgy for the day of a medical treatment, and for the period of Advent, and for the first wood fire of the season. And it's basically a whole bunch of different prayers that you can do by yourself or in groups. And as somebody who's terrible at praying out loud, because it always feels like performance art, I like this sort of stuff.
What is the title of the book?
Every Moment Holy, but I think the author is more useful to you because I don't know the original. Well, I can look that up. Hang on. The original is Every Moment Holy, so I translated it correctly. Yeah.
Who's the author?
Douglas McKelvey, Kelvey.
Oh, see, not even the Dutch are finding leadership from their own anymore.
But
now that's a conversation I'd like to have.
I want to respond to Job in your the one thing about Abide. Just to clarify something, like I'm a little nervous about all this talk about Abide winning in one sense, because Abide is a network, right? I think that's probably the best way to describe it, is that it's a network of people who have come together. But like Abide never tells me, like when I when I meet with my friends who are also associated with Abide, like they don't tell me how to vote, right? Like it's a forum for common discussion, right, about issues in the denomination that we sort of share a certain set of convictions about. But the classes are the ones that are electing their delegates to synod.
Right. So
And
it's more like voices, but more of a homogeneous blob.
Yes, I think that's probably a more accurate way. And so I think that what we've seen is that, like, I meet people at Synod who I have never met at an Abide conference. I've never heard them comment on an Abide thing, and they've come up to me and they've said, "We really like the work you're doing." It's like, I don't know these people from Adam, but they're out there and they're being delegated by their classes. So I think that just to be. I want to get, although I do want to get a shirt that says "Coo Boys," because that was a cool reference from James Bratt on the Reformed Journal. He called us all "Coo Boys,"
like the word for cow in Dutch.
No, as in French, a coup d'état.
Coo Boys. Oh, geez,
yeah.
I figured it would be a Dutch joke. I mean,
no, not at all. No. English is a mutt language, but
you should totally get your Dutch cow shirt.
I should do that.
In response.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Actually, that'd be even better satire because it could be cool. Yeah, I like it. But yeah, I just
that really works.
I want to sort of feed into that because I think people get this impression that like there's this, this cabal that's behind the scenes that's essentially just replaced the cabal that just left the denomination.
Right.
And I don't. That's not my experience. So,
well, that's good. That's helpful to hear because because we're formed from the other cabal.
It's like there's a shadowy group of Calvinists just dropping from the ceiling when you least expect them. Something like that.
Right. No one suspects the Calvinists.
All right, Stetson Scott. And now Stetson, thank you. Stetson is the painter, the artist who made that piece of art behind me, which I have to get out, see if the camera will refocus. It's really a beautiful piece. I haven't decided quite what to do with it, so I thought I'll put it behind me for a while, let other people enjoy it. So thank you, Stetson.
Kind of gives me
That's my pleasure.
vibes.
Is there going to be feedback here? I couldn't get my headphones to work, so I'm not sure if I should stay on the stream.
As long as you don't have another browser squawking a second or two after, you're probably going to be good. So go for it.
Yeah, I don't think I if you guys don't hear it, I don't think I do. So.
No, we're good.
Cool. Well, thank you for putting that on the stream. That's really generous of you. And so the artist stream is the we all work for exposure in the early days. So
I don't know how much you get helped by this, but here it is.
No, I mean, it's not about being helped, but I still see the generosity in it. I gave it out of I don't know, the desire that comes from Christ. I don't know how to put a finer point on that. So sometimes
you have anything you wanted to say about the stream?
Oh man. The interdenominational stuff. I've migrated so many denominations. I'm hyper ecumenical, so I don't. I'm more of a TLC creature than all this noise. I grew up Baptist, and so it's the non-denom for life for me, I suppose. I just got on the stream. I wasn't sure if the conversation was going to turn away from CRC conversation. If it isn't, I'll dismiss myself so you guys can stay.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I have no idea how Jacob's going to turn the stream, but Jacob is is a powerful stream turner. So I'm just bracing myself the way this thing's going to go. So
okay.
But thank you, Stetson, and thank you for the gift. It's really, really beautiful, and it's And if you come to Living Stones, ask to see it, because in real life it's there's a lot of texture to it, and you could really just sort of look at it and enjoy it, and so it's really much nicer than it looks on the stream. So
it'll if you put like a color changing light near it, it'll bloom and it looks alive. Or you can, there's videos of my paintings doing that on my Instagram.
Oh, all right.
2 points here, Paul. One, he's just told you that you're killing his art. You need to like make it alive. But the stop ruining his art. That's what he's trying to say.
No, not at all.
But the second
But I
thing
appreciate
is
that.
With regard to denominationalism, that did come up in the stream a little bit, and I'm probably wrong about this, but I think that the post-denominational stuff is a little overdone. I think, and I say that because I think to be a Reformed Christian, right, I do think that we do have our own philosophy or theology of church government, and it is the natural how do I want to say this, denominational sense. Like there's always going to be an extra congregational entity, right, for a Reformed church. There's always going to be a classis. There's always going to be a synod, right, if it gets to that side. So if that's what we mean by denominationalism, well, I can't imagine, no offense to the independent Reformed people out there, but I can't imagine Reformed theology without a Reformed denomination or a Reformed ecclesiastical structure that goes beyond the local level. So I'm a little skeptical of the post-denominationalism stuff.
Metagelical skeptic. There we hear it. Now, Jacob, I hope you forgive me, but Josh tried to get in before and then he had to drop out. He's going from the car. So don't worry, Jacob. You won't be passed over. Trust me. Josh, first time out of the lurk. Welcome. Thanks for jumping in the stream. Tell us a little bit about yourself and then why you jumped in.
Yes, hello. So Cedric and I actually know each other. Okay, I guess we serve in the same classes. So I've delegate to Synod 2023 and 2024, and currently part of the EPMC program in the CRC. So that's kind of my background right now. Yeah, so I've been listening to some very interesting conversations that you gentlemen have been having. So regarding, and I'm always looking at this thing from not just there's a lot of consequences that these decisions have, but there's also a lot of background to all of this too. I love the church history angle in this and how even philosophically how we enter into some of these questions. So you've seen me in the comments a little bit with, how do we deal with what is a Reformed hermeneutic? Because even talking to people within the EPMC program, people coming into the denomination, they're not always 100% able to define what a Reformed hermeneutic is. You ask 10 different people, you might get 5 or 6 different answers. That's a big question we're going to have with relationship to doctrine and identity, which is kind of behind all of this. And I think that tension that we've had in this Neo-Kuyperian conversation we've been having between what does it mean to have a true Reformed hermeneutic as opposed to this semper reformanda kind of thing of, well, we're always reforming. So how do we engage with culture and reform our ideas according to what our present culture is, as opposed to, well, how do we always have that reformed sort of anchor that allows us to take that step forward into culture? And I think that those two voices are very loud right now. Some that want to lean a little bit more towards the cultural refining aspect, and some of us want to lean a little bit closer to that, well, no, the orthodoxy and orthopraxy are not so unrelated kind of thing.
All right. Any responses to Josh?
Just a quick one. I think Women in Office dealt
a pretty significant blow to the Reformed hermeneutic. And I think part of what we're dealing with right now is you ended up in the women in office conversation with people on both sides sincerely applying the Reformed hermeneutic in depth and coming out on opposite sides. And I think that's that opens a little bit of a door to start to ask, how does the Reformed hermeneutic work for us? But what else is needed? And I mean, do we need to bring in some of the other elements, what used to be called the quadriga? But anyway, that's probably a conversation for another time.
All right. Okay. I'm unleashing him, the Jacob Federecci. Here you go, Jacob. I'm bracing myself.
Well, Casey and Nate, do you know Jacob? Have you listened? You're in for a treat.
You stepped on my joke. I was gonna start with Michael Servetus. I'm joking. By the way, this is a Karen Wong original, and this is a Sally Michelson Cooper original. And I find the whole discussion of images and the unlearned incredibly vital, and I think people should go there. I stepped in because Chad, of Chad's joke, really, which he made after I came in. Bunch of Jews and a bunch of Dutchies and a Jew walk into a bar. It was just really amusing to me because of the whole Iran-Israel war, which decided to happen during the conclave. I had other things on my mind.
The conclave, he calls it.
Oh, that's the other thing. If you look at my videos, I named all of them CRC Synod Conclave. But when I got a selfie from PVK and Cedric from Synod, it was just like, what am I doing in this world? But look, we need to talk about stuff, and I think that's what's going on, and we need to be able to talk about stuff in a way that somebody who does bring up Michael Servetus seriously does. And I think that is part of what's going on with the shift in Synod, is you are actually engaging as we with the world. And that's the shift in the banner, right? The banner used to be a conversation we have among us. And it can't be that anymore. Because when I say we, who do I mean? Am I including you guys?
Are we including you? Are we including Michael Servetus? Yeah, no, you're right, Jacob. You're right. So, good point. Good point. Sam.
Hi, Paul, and everyone on the panel, and thanks for being a good start to the weekend. And I'm just watching the video today, and I've got a question on my mind that I asked PVK about a year ago when the Synod drama was going on, and it was at maybe a little bit hotter temperature, which is, and I want to ask it actually because I was a little bit surprised by his answer, and I thought it was actually pretty thoughtful and pretty uplifting. But the question for Casey, Nate, and Cedric is, if I was like I don't know, if I'm like someone who's like 22 and I'm getting ready to go into seminary, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, do I want to be part of a denomination, or would it be better if I just try and attach myself to some church network, something like Saddleback or Elevation. What is your advice, and what would you say to someone who's in that situation? Because I look at it and I appreciate the commentary, but at the same time, I mean, I get the sense that almost everyone here that was at Synod is well into their career in a sense, and they're not necessarily the future. But I guess where is this going? I guess like maybe 20 or 30, maybe 40 years out from now, I guess is kind of my thought. So, and I'll get off and listen to the replies here.
I can jump on that right away. James K. Smith once wrote an article in Comment magazine called "We Believe in Institutions," and I always appreciated that. Institutions are very difficult to build. They're relatively easy to maintain because they have their own institutional inertia, but they can also are more fragile than they appear, and they can also be devastated by earthquakes of various sorts. But I think when you're 22, you don't necessarily have maybe much of a maybe some sense of the institutions around you, but you kind of have the sense of institutions around you like skyscrapers, like they're just there. And then as you grow in an institution for a long time, you realize how much work it takes to maintain it, and also how important it is. Like I spent a little time in New Jersey when I was a kid. Then I was part of a Christian Reformed church there. There was a short little time that I was part of a Christian Reformed church in Cincinnati, part of the Christian Reformed church in Seattle, Washington for a time, part of the Christian Reformed church in Grand Rapids, and now 2 different churches in Ontario. And the great thing about that is I know people from all different parts of this bigger institution, and that's what you get plugged into, is you get all of these connections and this mutual sharpening that goes along. So which you don't quite have when it's a loose association or affiliation, or are you in or are you out? Like you go down to Classis Red Mesa, you're in if you're CRC, and they're in too, and you go so you're connected to this much bigger thing, is what I'm trying to say.
And to add to what Nate said, I think one of the dangers of the more congregationalist approach, which is sort of the Saddleback network kind of stuff, is and I think one of the benefits of a more of a reformed ecclesiology is that there are no popes, right? But nevertheless, we have people who we are accountable to outside of our local congregations. We have our classes, we have our synods, and if I'm going off the rails in some way, if I might have. Now, this isn't the case at New Life CRC where I'm at now, but if I had all the elders in my pocket, right, or something of that nature, I could maybe get away with all kinds of stuff if I was a congregationalist. But when Josh or some of the other ministers in my classes hear that I'm telling people they need to give me $1 million and then God will bless them, they're going to come to me and they're going to discipline me, right? They're going to hold me accountable for what I'm doing. And so I think if you're thinking about going into ministry as a 22-year-old, another blessing that is reformed ecclesiology is that you're not solo, and that is sort of what Nate was talking about, but you're not solo also in the sense of you have people around you and you have institutions around you to help to protect the people you're trying to serve. So I'll just end it there.
I'm going to make a terribly crass point, which gets to the church planting conversation at Synod. The part of the reason I went to Calvin Seminary was because I was going to go to Fuller, because I'd been in CRC institutions my whole life and I wanted to get a little bit further outside of it. And John Algara who was on the student aid committee in classes Hackensack, came up to me at a softball game in New Jersey and said, you know, we support a whole bunch of people who barely have a connection to our classes. But if anybody is from this classes, it's you. And so we would love it if you would go to Calvin Seminary and you would let our student aid committee, basically pay for it. And, as a 22-year-old, that had some weight. And the girl I was going out with at the time was also staying at Calvin, so that didn't hurt either. But so the two lessons are: make sure you make it financially affordable for people, and make sure that there are hot girls there for the young men. And I think that's the key to leadership development for the future, at least in terms of 22-year-olds. So
fair.
I think that's a success strategy. Because right now,
money and hot girls, what could go wrong?
Come on. Isn't that what Donald Trump is all about?
When did Scott Eldersma get here?
Yeah. But I think, with a little less cynically and a little more fairly, I think the Christian Reformed Church has to show people what it's about. This sort of circles back to the earlier conversation that Andy proposed first off, which is that a group of people who knows themselves are attractive, because they're going to repel people too, because it's like, well, I don't want to be that. But I think a big part of this current vibe shift and is that, and Rod has said this, Hugan has said this to me many times. He said, young people come up to me and they're the children of divorce and they're out there in the world and they're simply bombarded by messages from everywhere. And if your movement doesn't have conviction about something, and if there isn't a degree of clarity, they might just go for the hot girls and the money. And so, more seriously, I think actually coming all the way back to the point you made initially, Nate, that I think now the Christian Reformed Church, probably we're going to continue to have some declines because it takes a while to move these things. But I think probably the kind of clarity that we're beginning to achieve on some things might help the Christian Reformed Church begin to reverse the decline. Because the truth is, if we don't know what we stand for, even though the things we stand for can be debated, and we have to have a posture with respect to that, and I think we have a pretty healthy one, actually. But if we don't know what we stand for, why would anybody say, I'm going to give that tradition a listen to? And, I might bow out at some point, but at least I'm not going to take anyone seriously who doesn't take themselves seriously. And I think that is super important. And I think it's a big part of this current vibe shift.
I just want to jump in here quick. One other thing that's very specific is that in our church polity, the elders and the council lead the church, and the elders oversee the work of the pastor. So if you're coming in at 23 or 22, the responsibility to keep the church going is not on your shoulders. It's on the shoulders of the consistory and the council instead. And I think if you're in a non-denominational church, or if you're in even in some church planting situations, it's all on you. And you got to raise the money, you got to control, you got to raise the leaders, you got to do it all. Whereas in our setting, there's specific tasks that you're responsible for, but keeping the church going as an institution, that's not on your shoulders.
All right, Stetson, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I finally have something I think might be helpful, or not, maybe not helpful, but profitable. So yeah, I was involved in a church plant. Well, my parents were. We left our big Baptist church in Paul's area, sort of arcade, and planted a tiny church in Roseville, and that became a massive church that's now non-denominational, and it's pastored by Pastor Lance Hahn. He's on the radio in Paul's area, and it's amazing. But it's interesting because I left, I went down and I actually went to like an Assemblies of God or a Foursquare college for a while, and which wasn't my denomination. It's very, I guess. And then when I went to Grass Valley, I lived there for a while, and I went to a church, and it was the first time a woman was preaching, and I have scrupulous OCD, which means that, I have basically one kind of dream my entire life, and that's dreams of hell, which is why I'm a universalist. I think unless you've been there over and over and over, you don't, it's like, yeah, that's, but we don't have to get into that. I walked out of that service because I was terrified of sitting underneath the teaching of a woman, but I didn't care personally. Like, I was like, yeah, of course a woman, I've learned from biblical truths from women my whole life. And my wife, I didn't want to I actually couldn't like verbalize it to her in the middle of the sermon. I thought that'd be rude. So I just left kind of quietly and just waited out in the foyer for the service to be over. And, my wife at the time, who was a little more, I guess modern in her sensibilities, was very put off by this and thought it was very strange that I had those convictions. But and then later I come back to this church that's grown huge, and they're embracing the women in ministry thing. They're associated with William Jessup University. I don't know if you guys know. And
but when Synod is done in Sacramento, we'll probably have Synod at William Jessup.
Okay, yeah, it's very central to the I don't know, the Christian teaching, I guess, in the area. So it's very interesting to have this, and I'm like, well, now how do I feel about this? I was a little bit ashamed that I left before, but having scrupulous OCD, you're never quite sure where these convictions are coming from and how valid they are. And so that's probably the force that makes me so ecumenical, is that I've hung with the the hardcorest of the fundamentalists. I don't know if CFC India is CRC, but they're Calvinists, and there's one in like Denver and one in the Bay Area. The preacher there is Zach Poonen, and his sons actually planted a bunch of churches in the States after they're one of the biggest churches in Bangalore, India. But I just don't know. Like, to me, it all is. I do have a hard time, just from my experience, taking I think God provides. The structure is great. The hot girls and money is great. If that's but sometimes it's leprosy and lepers on an island. And the church grows, and sometimes it's icons, and sometimes it's the worst music you've ever heard in a crappy portable, and that's that's what I've always enjoyed about the Lord, is all of the facets. And so while but you need the facets to maintain their edges, I suppose, in order to have them be differentiated. So I'm not against denominations, because I want people to have their convictions. And I know our psychotechnologies need some real true ground in order for us to operate in the world. So I never try and talk people off of their positions when there's nothing to gain, really. And I don't really see a whole lot to gain in a lot of what these denominations divide over. I've been in churches where they divide over the carpet. I just don't know how to. I don't know how to like care. To be honest, it's a lot about nothing sometimes. Personally, right. I know that's not how you fellas feel, but for me, it's often bizarre. Like, okay, yeah, I know people care. I do. But like, if everyone looks the same when we're out taking care of the homeless, All
right, Job, you wanted to get in on this.
Yeah. Well, about the denomination thing. Paul, you've seen the letter that I've sent you. That I sent Paul a 3-page letter I've sent to my church council a couple of months ago. But before I do that, I do want to say, Casey, I really appreciate your shirt, man. That looks good. All right. So Stetson, if I understood, you said that you don't understand the idea of denominations or the how they differentiate. Did I understand that correctly?
Oh no, I'm very clear on the differentiation. Like I understand the importance that people hold to it. I understand that a lot of people feel like they're even back with Wesleyan and gosh, who was the other big reformer? They would say like, I don't even think that guy's worshiping the same God, but somehow I felt this, the spirit, I understand the need. I understand the doctrinal intensity and how that motivates people. But there's a part of me that in the spirit that it makes me, because I guess, and this is probably just because I've vacated so many hard-held positions for myself from being pushed by life into being forced to consider at a deep level. When you have scrupulous OCD, you don't get to hold on to anything because the anxiety makes you so open, because like, oh, maybe I am thinking of this wrong. When you really are afraid that God's going to damn you for having the slightest wrong motion or opinion, it's very hard, and after you like, oh no, I found the new thing. I found the new denomination that's going to save me. I found the new set of doctrines that are really going to unlock, what's missing in my spiritual practice. And you do that. I'm 37 now, you do that for a number of years. Eventually, maybe some other thing, you begin to behold something else that's larger than all of these. But I respect and appreciate people having these deep convictions. I guess personally, I do find it a little hard to maybe I don't want to say care, because that seems flippant, but I in some sense I personally have a hard time making that translate into something real inside here. Is that helpful?
I think so, and you might actually have some very good insight for me. So I got to give you some context. So I'm part of a Reformed church, Dutch Reformed, which is an afscheiding church. Church history. Anyway, all these Dutch guys know what I mean by afscheiding. But basically, the Dutch state church, the Reformed Dutch state church, is becoming a bit too liberal, and so the afscheiding churches said, we want our three forms of unity. We're starting our own church, and we don't want the state to meddle. And anyway, long story short, that's the denomination I used to be a part of. I joined them in 2018 as an atheist, and like, hey, can I hang out with you guys while I'm figuring some stuff out? Okay, I'm now an elder on the board, so that's how these things go. But since last year, we are no longer a Reformed church. We are a Protestant congregation, because we no longer identify with the moniker Reformed, because it scares people away. It sounds orthodox, and orthodox is a scary word. So I've been trying to tell my church, well, wait a second, because my church is extremely worried about all the kids leaving and about the old people dying off and the youth just not staying around and nobody new coming in. And I've been trying to tell them, well, what do you believe? Well, we're pluriform. Okay, but what do you believe? Well, everybody believes in their own way. Okay, but what do we confess? We don't confess anything. Well, what about the three forms of unity? No, we reject those. Okay, so if somebody comes into our church just to look around, what do we well, we give them this welcome flyer. Well, does it say what we believe? No. Okay, it tells you how the liturgy goes. Okay, but why is the liturgy that way? Well, that's just the Reformed tradition. Okay, so basically I keep hammering on this thing, like what is our identity? What do we believe? What can we tell to somebody who doesn't know anything? This is our existential frame. This is our little box of confessions, dogmas. You got to start somewhere. Okay, so I eventually just asked my pastor, like, what do we believe? He says, oh, well, we believe that Christ died and rose again. Like, okay, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Which to me is just more questions like, well, who was Christ? Why did he die? Why was he raised? Who raised him? Is he still alive? What's his relationship to the other entity that raised him, or is it the same entity? I mean, so right away you can't just stick with the very small. So So this letter is going to be discussed Monday in church council. Together with
I
the
have a
letter,
suggestion. I have a
yeah,
suggestion.
well, I'm not going to become Jewish, Jacob.
No. Mark 12. It's a beautiful thing to start with. Mark 12. A young scholar asks Jesus, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus forgot to mention he got it from Hillel, but that's fine.
Yeah.
His plagiarism is a Christian thing. He answers, and apparently this is the only place in the entirety of the Christian Bible where a bunch of Jews ask Jesus a question, and Jesus gives an answer, and the Jews are like, "Yeah. Everywhere else,
The scholar asks on, right? Well, at least in Luke, he asks a follow-up.
I am
Anyway,
not.
So
I am not
your
a pastor of Christianity. There are many pastors of Christianity above us who can further explain Mark 12.
Well,
but I think Mark 12 is a very, very good place for Christians to start. I highly recommend it. In fact, historically, Mark was written before Matthew. You may not have not known that, but it was.
So when you were asking all those questions,
of John.
When you were asking all those questions in the situation, or describing, sort of reflecting on the questions that you would ask when someone's like, "Well, we believe in Christ crucified and risen," right? And you have all those questions. My brain went to, the Jewish modes of thinking about Scripture, which is not to just serve you those answers, but to send you looking for them, because you'll find them, at the chiasm, at the X marks the spot where the treasure is. And so the purpose, or like the part of the liturgy, or maybe the practices, maybe that's better, not the liturgy, but the practices of Christian life, at least in my opinion, that's been informed by some liberal scholarship that is ripped from Jewish scholarship, specifically the scholarship of Rabbi Foreman. It's the Bema podcast if you're interested. But it is you don't want to answer every one of those questions for people because it's harder to own the answer to those questions if someone gave you the answer. So I think there is like a minimal facts sort of approach to maybe church doctrines to unite around, that allow for people to explore and discover these things for themselves. And that the idea is discipleship, right? So you're trying to herd these sheep, and let them graze.
But I can't herd them without a framing. You can't box with a tub of jelly. I mean, you need some sort of.
Well, they heard with the voice. The shepherds heard with their voice, right? And they kind of move around like an amoeba on the side of a hill, and it's a very different. I mean, yes, we make pens, but I agree that you have to know for yourself, and I think that the leadership in any given body that's local to itself needs to, be in agreement. And those agreements need to be, are kind of fractal, right? We need to agree on these big things, to do this stuff together, and then to do maybe this more detailed stuff together. We might need to be in agreement on a few more things, to do certain kinds of ministry, and so on and so forth, which is why I appreciate the sort of fractal reality of all these denominations, and approaches, to Hashem, coming out of the church. Right. I think I see the value and the beauty in that. And so I do encourage you guys to, I think the weird state thing with your state trying to step into your church's doctrine, I don't like that, but that's my American side coming out.
That was a little while ago.
That was like
I doesn't have much interest in that.
Okay, well, yeah, because I can understand that's always a liberalizing influence. The state wants to create, useful citizens and economic units. It's not really concerned about, doctrine, it seems to me. So
right,
I'm
gonna land the plane here.
No. This is just getting good.
Well, why don't you go to the Bridges of Meaning Discord server and keep going there in the voice chat? I think you should do that, Job. and bring Stetson along, because it's a super important conversation, and I'd love to have you guys have it. But our friend Cale Zeldin is trying to do a live stream where he's talking to his brother, who has just been ordained into the Catholic Church and is a priest in the Catholic Church. I don't want to step on poor Cale's.
No, but they're Catholics. We're talking Reformed stuff here, which is clearly more important.
Oh, I love the Catholics.
Yeah, it says Job. I won't out something of huge Job I have before, but
Let's go
I do want to land the plane here, because I actually have some other Christian things I need to do for my church this afternoon. But I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you, Cedric, for hanging in there. Thank you, Jacob, for just being Jacob. Thank you, Stetson, for coming out of the lurk and sharing a little bit of yourself with us. If maybe some other in the corner will like to follow up and get more of your story, maybe I'll randle you sometime. My summer schedule's pretty impacted between vacation and Midwestuary and all that stuff coming, so it's not going to be a lot of
we'll do it.
now.
Well, let's do it in person if we do it. I'm an in-person person, and I can come to where you are. I think that'd be more interesting.
Oh, that would be fun. Would we record it, or we just do it?
Yeah. Record it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's some new ground. So there we go. And thank you, Job, for coming up. And Job is a busy man now with 2 small children, and so he doesn't have near as much time as he used to for the corner and for the Discord server and all those things. But he's still obviously interested in following along. And all right, so I'm going to play a little bit of branding and go over to Cale Zeldin's channel, From Brother to Father with Father Josh, Cale and his brother. So thank you all.
Take care, everybody.
Where shall we start?
Ken knew happy, though. Great Ken knew happy, and I can rejoice about that.
Although this world will devastate you, and rejoice although this world will penetrate you, and rejoice although you will not survive. Rejoice you'll never make it out alive.
Excellent rehearsal, gentlemen.
And rejoice, your hair it smells like burning hair. Oh, rejoice, your nails all got chewed off. Oh, rejoice, and holy fuck, you're bleeding there. Oh, rejoice, you burn your whole beard off. Rejoice, despite the fact this world will hurt you. And rejoice despite the fact this world will kill you. And rejoice despite the fact this world will tear you to shreds. Rejoice because you're trying your best.
Hey, I love that one. That's gorgeous. Thank you, brother. Who's that brother?
Also in today's community report, Clara, our resident sociologist, had some relevant things to say to the world.
So this is my kitchen. You can even see that there is a fly trap behind me. That's something I would have removed if I had really thought about this, because that is disgusting. Right now I am roasting chicken to eat later today, and I feel like I need to justify that to myself and to the world, like literally to the world, because I'm live streaming.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th, in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreer, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh boy.
How you doing,
Yeah, walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
Yeah, walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord. And hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing? Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my city. I want Jesus.
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
To walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy. Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king. And David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. You gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.